all the news organizations at the national level in the lower 48, et cetera, are trying to blame all of this collapsing salmon fishery on climate change. And it just doesn't hold water. There was a record run of Kenai River reds last year. Even the silvers are doing a little bit better. Pinks are, running strong as they've ever done in a lot of fisheries. And those fish aren't on the same level of the water column that are affected like chums and kings are. It's not just climate change. It can't be. Because if it was, then the pinks would be struggling too. And so would the reds and, everything else that runs into this river systems.
This is the Tom Rowland Podcast. Fascinating stories to amaze, encourage, and inspire you in fishing, fitness, and the outdoors. And we're brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. I started this podcast as a way to connect with my friends, people that I admire and respect, and you. It has been a learning journey that's made me a better person, a better fisherman, a better father, and a better athlete. I'm so happy that you're on this journey with me, and I'd love to hear from you with show suggestions, guest suggestions, or questions. The best way to get a hold of me is through text. You can text 305-930-7346 for the fastest response, but if you prefer to email, you can send that to podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That's a dedicated email address just for the show. If you like this show, you can show your support by posting about it on social media and tagging me. Text the link to a couple of friends that may also enjoy it, and subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you feel like I've earned it. The website is tomrowlandpodcast.com, and that is where everything lives. All past shows, you can go and listen to any show. You can look up all the different shows that we've done, both the How To Tuesdays, the full links, and the physical Fridays. They all live on tomrowlandpodcast.com. And the social media is Tom_Rowland, ROWLAND, on Instagram, or you can go to our big account, Saltwater_Experience. I hope to hear from you soon. So now, let's get on to today's show.
I'm Cody McLaughin, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
All right, Cody, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's good to have you on here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we were just talking about your move to Alaska.
Yep.
Where did you move there?
So I moved up to Wasilla, or just outside of Wasilla in Big Lake, in the Mat-Su Valley, about an hour-ish outside of Anchorage.
Okay. I was just up in that area, not too far from you, last summer, and love Alaska. Man, what an incredible state that is.
God, you can't look in any direction and not see something pretty. I'm telling you, I'm looking at, there's a window over here and a window over here. I can see the Chugach Mountains out that window, and there's a horse farm behind me. And out this one's just really wooded and stuff. So
that's awesome. So
any direction you look at.
How did you decide to move there? What was the move like?
So I'm a COVID mover. So I lived and worked on the East Coast a lot of my life. I worked in Oregon for a couple of years. I work in politics, so I worked in 26 states, lived in all of them for a few months at a time each. Ended up in DC, absolutely hated my life because I couldn't see anything green, couldn't really go fishing every day, stuff like that. Moved back to New Jersey. New Jersey, to their credit, has some decent fishing. But always kind of felt the itch to go to Alaska. It's one of the few states I had never worked in. And so then COVID happened. Shortly after COVID happened, do you guys remember those big city riots over the whole race issue and stuff in 2020?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got stuck in the middle of one of them, and then during one of those riots, somebody cracked the back window of my truck. And that was it for me. I was like, no more cities, no more East Coast, no more nothing. I'm moving either to Montana or Alaska. I saw a great property for sale that a friend of mine posted about, kind of saying the same thing in Alaska. That one fell through, but then a couple months later, a realtor found me a really nice house in Wasilla. I couldn't believe how cheap it was. I couldn't believe how cheap the taxes were in comparison to where I come from in Jersey. So I sight unseen, I did a FaceTime walkthrough of the house, and then afterwards, a month later, I was on a plane to Alaska.
Wow. Wow. And so how has it been since moving there? Were there a lot of other people that moved to Alaska or
Yeah, I think Alaska really did get an influx of people from the work from home crowd, right? COVID pushed a lot of what were office jobs into work from home jobs, which I think is the direction that they should be going anyway, because it gives people like me, the ability to work, doing a good job that pays well, but also get to do what I love, which is, go fishing in Alaska. So I think there's a lot of people that did that. Thankfully, I moved to Big Lake, so it's a little bit outside of the city itself. So, I'm still in kind of a relatively, by lower 48 standards, undeveloped kind of rural area. But it was a great move for me. And I mean, from a happiness standpoint, it's funny. My coworkers would tell me every morning, they say, "Oh my God, it's 5 a.m. for you. I'm so sorry that I'm calling you so early." And I'm like, dude, I love working East Coast hours in Alaska because I work from 5 to 2, and I can still take a half an hour nap if the spirit moves me. And by 2:30, I'm fishing.
Yeah. So what about the fishing that you're doing up there? What kind of fishing do you like to do? There's so much different types of fishing up there. Even when I was just there last year, we did 3 or 4 different types of fishing. It was incredible. I mean, there's so much to do.
There's no shortage of it either. And you could throw a rock in any direction and find fishable water, seemingly. So lakes, rivers, small streams, bigger streams, creeks. You got the saltwater. You got 8 months of hard water fishing. You got a really strong summer where you can fish until 3 o'clock in the morning and it looks like it's noon outside. And so I've been focusing a lot on salmon, and to a smaller degree in some of those off times between salmon runs, I'll target grayling because I think they're cool, which really miffs the trout fishermen because they're like, well, wait till you hook into a trout. And I'm like, look, man, I can get a trout in any state. Okay. I can't get a grayling in any state. I can't get an Arctic char in every state. So there's no shortage of great fishing up here.
In planning our trip last year, one of my Alaskan contacts was telling me about the grayling fishing up there. And apparently, if you get in the right spot, it is incredibly good.
Oh my God. Especially the right time of year, because they tend to move. They follow the salmon around and basically eat their eggs. But I caught 2 trophy sized grayling last year. I mean, I got what do they call them? The certificates and stuff from the Alaska Fish and Game Commission. So they were all over 18 inches long, and that's bigger than any trout I'd ever seen before moving to Alaska. Right. Yeah. So, and I caught one 20+ inch, fat grayling. The thing was massive. And I mean, I got an IGFA Super Grand Sam for salmon, and this is all in 2 years. I caught damn near 30-inch, really nice fall spawning color Arctic char. I've caught my fill of kings. I filled my freezer with kings and red salmon, and I've battled chums, pink salmon, caught really nice halibut. Nothing over 100 pounds yet, which I'm really hoping for, but I've been chasing them. There's over 100 different types of rockfish up here in the salt there. Wow. So there's no shortage of opportunity.
Well, it sounds like you've been pretty busy.
Damn near every day, man. Especially in the summertime.
That's awesome, man. That's really awesome. And what about the bear? What about the bear situation? With all that roaming around, have you run into a few?
Yes, quite a few. Largely, they leave you alone. I gotta say, and I'm not trying to be Mr. Tough Guy up here. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I spent a week hunting deer on Kodiak, and I got really lucky that first summer here. I didn't see a lot of brown bears. I saw the tracks and the scat, and I was basically right behind them in the creek, but they'd just walk up ahead of me, and I was never on the same section of creek they were. Because I spent miles and miles on the Willow Creek and Deception Creek and Montana Creek up near Willow in the South Central region. But so the first brown bear I saw in the wild was on Kodiak, and I was dropping a deuce on a lakeside up in the Alpine next to my camp, and he came waddling out of the brush, and this thing looked like kid from Jersey, camping alone on Kodiak. This thing looked like an SUV with fur.
Yeah.
And I was like, this thing, what the hell? And so I had a whole discussion at the gun shop when I first moved up here about what I should carry around for bear protection. And there's two schools of thought. There's the semi-auto school of thought where you get a 10 millimeter and that's all you really need because you get more shots off. It's more efficient. And there's the 357 mag. You only need one bullet, but like it's a revolver. Mm-hmm. So I've never really been comfortable with revolvers. I've always been more of a long arm guy anyway. So like I was like, you know what? If I'm going to be quaking like a maraca, I would rather have my 10 mil.
Yeah.
So that I felt it was woefully inadequate though the first time I saw one. So I came back and first thing I bought was a 357 mag.
Wow. And do you carry bear spray too, or just that?
Occasionally bear spray. I'm gonna sound either stupid or like I'm trying to be a tough guy, but a lot of times I don't like carrying around the gun. It's like very cumbersome, especially like if you're trying to take on and off your tackle bag and whatnot. It just gets in the way. So I don't really carry anything half the time. But when I do, it's usually the 10 mil. I'll either stick it I'll either clip it to the tackle bag where I can have easy access, or like right in front of my belt on my waders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's they're really big and very intimidating, and
Yes, they are.
in a lot of ways you're lucky to get. I mean, if something really went bad and they were to charge you, you'd be lucky to get to your bear spray and having never practiced, finding it. A lot of people are putting it like around their backside and they've never practiced pulling this out. The same thing with a pistol. If you don't practice drawing that pistol, the chances of you being able to draw it, if you really needed to, would probably be pretty low.
Well, and that's why I'm more comfortable with the pistol, because I do go to the range and practice with that a lot more. So again, like to your point, every time I look at the bear spray canister, I'm like, man, I don't practice with this enough to be able to like in one fluid motion flick the thing off and spray a bear charging 30 miles an hour in the face.
That's what you don't. I mean, a lot of people don't really consider that, is like this thing is fast as a racehorse, and it's going to be, if you have to do this, it's going to be coming directly at you. Like it's not like I don't know, maybe I've never been charged by a grizzly bear, so thankfully, so I don't know, but I've seen the videos, and when they decide to come, it's really, really fast, and
yeah, they run like the Dickens, man.
Yeah.
Like faster than a black bear. I mean, faster than a deer.
Yeah.
Like I've seen videos too, and I've seen them run away from me, and they cover so much ground so quick that and nothing really gets in their way. They're knocking over bushes and whatnot. They're not going around stuff to get at you.
Well, let's hope it never happens to either one of us. And
thankfully, every time I've seen a grizzly bear run in real life, it's been the other direction.
Yeah.
I spooked one I spooked a big boar. He was probably 500 or 600 pounds at Troublesome Creek, which is named that because
Aptly
of all
named.
the bears that they have up there. Yeah. So I was fishing the Troublesome Creek during the King run last year, and trying to go for because there's a lot of trout that follow around those Kings,
Sure.
and you get the big fat trout that are like tanks because they feed up on the salmon eggs.
Yeah.
So I was going after them, just chucking beads. And yeah, it's about a half-mile hike from the parking area down to the creek, and I spooked this big brown bear, and he just got up, and all you saw was his big brown ass just waddling away, and it was like,
that's the right direction. That's the direction you want him to go. I can assure you.
Yeah.
It's definitely the direction. So the king fishing is one of the reasons why we're talking today. Tell me about what your first experience was when you first got to Alaska. You go and experience the king run, and what year that was, and just what that was like.
Yeah, so that was 2021. In May 2021. I did a lot of research. I was looking at maps. I was driving around scouting all the way through the wintertime, trying to figure out where it's going to, thaw out first, where what it's going to look like, talking to people in the Facebook groups and the tackle shops and stuff. I ended up settling on fishing a Willow Creek when that opened up for kings. And I did one fly fishing trip down with an outfitter by the name of Bear Paw River Guides. That guy really taught me a lot about fishing in Alaska, especially in that creek system. His name's Shane Ford, really nice guy. And so he gave me like a really good crash course in like just fishing in Alaska. We spent the whole day together and, talking about how to fish the king run and stuff. Cause I had fished in anadromous runs before. Obviously most fishermen have, but like shad and stuff like that, where like they're so thick that like you're either in them or you're not in them. And it's really easy to figure out. So, salmon are a little bit more finicky to a degree where you can be in them. You can see piles of them in the water, but if they're not biting for any reason, they're just, then you're still casting right over them. So, so everybody was saying, and you take this with a grain of salt when you hear people say this, right? The fish are so thick you can walk on their back across the water, blah, 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 blah. The water looks black, yada, yada. I thought they were full of crap. I'm not gonna lie. For all the way up until May, I'm like, okay, cool. Sounds great. Thanks. Comes time, and I'm telling you, when that bite turns on, it goes bananas. Like there's just, you see people, and you're either fishing with a billion people or no people in Alaska. It's the weirdest thing in the world. There's never like just one other guy on the river with you. It's either combat fishing or like you are by yourself. But no matter what happens, once the bite really turns on, you really get a lot of action. And I'm saying there was no shortage of kings. I was pulling, 30, 35, damn near 40-inch fish out of the water like they were going out of style.
Wow.
And putting them back and just hooking another one a couple minutes later, I had the most success fishing for kings that first year. I learned a lot because I was fishing for the trout that were chasing them, and they were taking the little trout lures and spooling me.
Yeah.
So they get really aggressive, like especially like right before they start really, really turning. They start protecting their nests and stuff. I learned a lot about their behavior. I learned a lot about reading the water, frankly. There's so much more water up here that you learn a lot more about, what kind of seams you're looking for, telling how deep a seam is just by looking at it, things like that.
Nice. And then what was the amount of fish that you saw that first year compared to maybe the following year? How did that kind of shake out? Yeah, so that's the starkest part of it for me, is that there was no shortage of kings that first year. Tons of them. I probably personally caught somewhere in the 90 to 96 king range that first year, and this is as a newbie, right? Like never fished for kings before. And so Alaska does a lot of fishing management by emergency order. So they, either pro or against the fishermen, right? So like they'll liberalize your taking possession limits or tighten them by emergency order with 12 hours notice. So that first year it was bananas. Like every day there was another emergency order liberalizing the season. Hey, you can catch more kings. You can catch them out of the Little Sioux now. You can catch them, you can use bait now, blah, blah, blah. Like all of this, all these liberalizations. And I was expecting the same thing that second year, and it was completely the opposite. Season started like normal, and then a week in, they canceled fishing out of a couple of the major river systems in my area. And then they closed the entire Susitna River drainage last year for king salmon, and all the way through the Knik. So all the way, they closed the legendary Kenai River for kings. Yeah. That's where I was.
All these huge, like legendary. 2 world records came out of the Kenai River, and they like all these legendary like things things old timers back east talk about.
Right.
Fisheries, they closed, and then they restricted so much of the state that I had to go in order to keep a king. One king I kept last year, put him in my freezer. We had to go all the way 250 or so miles east of where I'm at right now, to the Gulcana River, completely different, like the Copper River system. And even that was starting to tighten up. And then you start thinking about what other fisheries in the state have been going through, like the Yukon River, their chum season, their king season, all of that stuff. Even the subsistence guys aren't allowed to fish anymore in that river.
Really?
Oh yeah, they closed down even subsistence fisheries in the Yukon River.
Wow. And so your experience, like I know that there are all sorts of mechanisms that the state uses to count fish and ways that they know, pretty accurately, I would imagine, what's coming into the river. But as an angler's perspective, from 2021 to 2022, you're going and fishing the same place. You're seeing the river is black. You can walk across their backs on one year, and the next year looks like what?
I mean, a fish every 100 yards or so.
Wow.
One or two at a time.
Wow. In 1 year.
In 1 year. Now, and you think about it, so all of this stuff had to start happening 7-ish years ago, because kings spend anywhere between 4 and 7 years in the ocean before they start running back up the river, which is when we see them, right? So something had to happen, because this is the second year in a row that they're preemptively closing the king salmon before they ever even reach the rivers now. And they're closing the entire Knik drainage for king retention. I've had to cancel 4 guided king fishing trips over the last 2 years that I booked a year out, and that's not a problem for me because I live down the road, right? If the guide calls and cancels with me, cool.
Right.
I'm just not going king fishing that day, and I'll just find something else to do that day. But I shudder to think about what a lot of your listeners, like guys that are coming up here for a once in a lifetime, I'm going to catch a king salmon. They're literally called king salmon for a reason, right? Like they're these legendary fish in a legendary run in the legendary state of Alaska. And I mean, these guides are going through it right now. Like they're not getting a lot of like forward insight into how it's going to look. And then if they're having to cancel fishing trips for these out of state, anglers that are coming up here to have a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it really is turning into a once in a lifetime opportunity. If you haven't fished for kings yet in Alaska, you should get it done in the next 12 months, or I'm not sure what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years at this rate.
Yeah. So like you're living up there, and I'm sure that this is the topic of conversation at every place you're having a cup of coffee or anything else. Like, I mean, this is the lifeblood of Alaska in a lot of ways. What are the locals saying? Like, what do people think happened? What's the kind of talk about what might have happened, either coming from the state scientists and biologists, or coming from the locals, or coming from people that have lived there their entire life? And maybe somebody's got a little bit of insight that, people like myself that love Alaska and want to come back to Alaska, everybody's kind of interested in this. And I have heard about the king's decline, but nobody, I don't know why, or if there's anything that can be done about it, or if, I don't know, just kind of what's your opinion of what people are talking about up there, and are there different kind of theories about what has happened?
So there's a bunch of theories about what's happening, and there's a huge disconnect between what all the national newspapers, all the lower 48 newspapers are covering, right? Oh my God, it's climate change. It's all climate change, which I'm sure that has something to do with it, right? For sure. Nobody up here is denying that, but they totally gloss over what other interests are having as an effect on king salmon, especially across the state. So one big contributor to the decline our opinion. So I'm on the board of the Alaska Outdoor Council, which is an advocate for hunting and fishing policy and equal access for the residents of the state and non-residents alike to enjoy all the outdoors that Alaska has to offer. So we're of the strong opinion that that factory trawling has had a huge impact on Alaska fishing, especially king salmon fishing, but also other really good sport fisheries in Alaska. Chum salmon, in my opinion, are the second best. I know a lot of people are huge silver fishermen. I'll get to them in a second because I think they're third, but I think pound for pound, a chum salmon's a better fish to catch if you're just looking to rip lips.
Now, I heard when we were up
collapsed.
there that was another species that was having a very hard time. And I was surprised because the first time I went to Alaska was probably 18 years ago, and the chums were thick. And it was like the Jack Crevalle in Florida or something. It's like, we don't want any more of those. And it's like, I don't know. They fight pretty hard. These are really fun. And and that so I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but the chum was I had found out the same thing, that they were in decline also. So
also a massive decline, especially on that Yukon River, the eastern side of the state. So you have these two major kind of legendary fisheries. To a lesser degree, you're seeing impacts on the silver fishery as well. Silver salmon, they're kind of the queen of salmon, if you will. And the effect it's having is that trawling is having is through what's called bycatch. So every type of commercial fishing has bycatch to it. So and bycatch, if you're not familiar with commercial fishing policy, is just when commercial fisheries catch something by accident and or kill it by accident, and it's not what they were intending. So if they're, a lot of this is driven by pollock fishing, right? So if they're midwater trawling, quote unquote, midwater trawling for pollock, and they sweep up, a whole pot of kings, and, they get caught in nets or gills get ripped, et cetera, or they're, in the case of halibut, where these giant factory draggers are dragging across the bottom and just mowing down these kings or these halibut, you're seeing huge bycatch mortality rates. It's almost 100% of whatever they're bycatching. But the problem is that it's a really murky issue from a mathematical standpoint because of the way that fisheries are observed in Alaska. So observer rates are super low, especially in the Gulf of Alaska, where a lot of this is happening. So actual king bycatch could be 10 times what we're actually seeing recorded. And the number that we're actually seeing recorded, which again, we're saying is low, is incredibly high. Since 1991, I've got some numbers here for you. Since 1991, a total of 1.7 million kings have been documented as trawl bycatch in Alaska. It could be anywhere up to 10 times that amount. So you're talking about from anywhere from 1.7 to nearly 12 million kings could have been, and that's just the king salmon, could have been the subject of bycatch in Alaska. Just over 1 million of those came from the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Islands, and another nearly 1 million of them came from the Gulf of Alaska. And that information does not come from me. That comes directly from weekly bycatch reports that are published by the Department of Fish and Game. Observer rates, again, really low. But we've got a message. The AOC got a message from one guy who said they were getting 30,000 pounds of kings in a single trawl set. And this was back in the 80s. Now, again, the 80s sounds like a long time ago, but when you're talking about runs that are on 7-year cycles, right? All of that stuff that happened back then is starting to affect us to a great degree now, because the more that they're killing these fish before they even get into the river to spawn, the more that they're reducing the potential for fish further down the line. And that was back on Kodiak. Trawl regulators, and this is the big problem, right? The MPFFC don't even make an attempt.
Wait, what is the MPFFC? What is that?
The North Pacific Marine Fishery Council.
All right.
So they're the federal group that is supposed to regulate maintain the balance between commercial fishing and sport fishing in Alaska and the North Pacific. Now, I know a lot of commercial fishermen. I know a lot of guys who do both sport fishing, like as guides, and the commercial fishing thing. I don't have any love lost for commercial fishermen. I have great respect for that tradition because I believe that everybody should have access to clean and sustainable seafood. And a lot of these like longline fisheries and stuff like that are a good way to get sustainable seafood that everybody should have the right to have. Factory fishing, though, like trawling, is doing huge damage to halibut nurseries, to king salmon, to chum salmon, a lot of the like fish that are lower in the water column. Back to the Marine Fisheries Council, they don't even make an attempt at factoring in the unobserved bycatch. Okay, so there's two types of bycatch. There's a bycatch that makes it onto the deck, right? They're caught up in the same net. They get dragged up to the top. They're all tangled in it and whatnot. They die because they get shoveled over. Literally, shovelfuls of them get thrown over the side. Dead fish, right? That's one thing. Disgusting enough to think about. And think about this for a second. A factory trawler can literally take shovelfuls of fish off of their deck and toss them over the side. Okay. If I don't take enough moose meat off the ribs of a moose I shoot, okay, enough, not just, if I don't take enough of the rib meat off the ribs and skeleton of a moose that I shoot up here, or even a fish, it's called wanton waste, and I can go to jail for that. Not just a fine, I can go to jail for it, okay? But back to unobserved bycatch. So the unobserved bycatch is the actual stuff that's killed while still in the water and never makes it to the surface. So regulators aren't even trying to account for that in any of the numbers. They're assuming that number is zero. They're assuming that something that like the size of a mini mall that's being dragged across the bottom isn't killing anything that doesn't make it onto the boat. Wow. Which is absurd when you think about it. And some people think, I tend to kind of, it's hard to measure that number, so I don't want to make assumptions, but there have been a lot of people who think that unobserved bycatch could be as high or even higher than observed bycatch. But from a scientific perspective, the fishery regulators essentially pretend it doesn't exist, and that's a problem. Yeah. You couple that with the fact that over the last 10 years, trawl in Alaska has reported wasting 141 million pounds of bycatch a year. That's 141 million pounds of fish. Wow. An average of 1 million pounds of waste every 3 days. Every 2.5 to 3 days, they're wasting 1 million pounds of fish. And that is, again, just the reported stuff, which we know to be lower than the reality. So it could be anywhere between 3 to 10 million pounds of fish that are getting killed and chucked over the side and wantonly wasted every day.
Wow. These big factory trawlers, that's what you were calling them, right? Like factory?
Yep.
How big are those boats?
60 to 70 meters in length. Okay. And they go to sea for about 6 to 8 weeks at a time, but there's about 40 crew on each one of those boats.
Okay. And then who are these American vessels or international vessels? Who owns these vessels?
So there's a lot there's almost no Alaskan trawlers. A lot of them are from Washington, but most of them are international organizations that come over here and through Washington fish Alaska waters.
Wow. So is there a solution to any of this? If this is truly the problem, which it sounds like, obviously if it's not the problem, it is a problem, which seems disturbing. Do you see any solution?
Yeah, I think that, look, an ideal solution to this would be to outright ban factory trawling. I think there's huge problems with it. I think it's causing a lot of problems for the fisheries up here, which are obviously in need of some drastic action in order to save these fish, right? Because this is one of the last great runs of king salmon, of chum salmon in the world, and this is, I think, the only state that has representative wild populations of all 5 Pacific salmon species. And if we don't want these salmon species to go the way of the Atlantic salmon, where it's all just farmed crap, I think we need to take real action. Like, and I'm talking yesterday, if not yesterday, then today, like right now, to save these fish from going the way of the Atlantic salmon. And so banning factory trawling would be a start. If we can't get there today, because factory trawlers unfortunately have very deep pockets and a lot of money for lobbying and things of that nature, and they throw expensive dinners for Marine Fisheries Council members and things like that. Then I think we need to institute real limits and real data from observers on the actual effects of bycatch, and getting some real numbers, not just a 15% report rate, but real numbers on both observed bycatch and unobserved bycatch. Like, there needs to be a study done on that at minimum, because if the estimates are right that it kills just as many fish as observed bycatch, then that would overnight double the amount of bycatch that should be reported. And that's not even factoring in the fact that that bycatch is underreported as a general rule.
Mm-hmm. So here's a question for you. As soon as the numbers of fish coming into the river decline, and for anybody that doesn't know this, maybe you can explain it better than me, but when I was up there, I was asking our guides about it. There are certain mechanisms that count fish in the river. They count the fish that are going up the river, and they can even tell, is that a king, or is that a silver, or is that a chum, or they can even tell the species of the different fish. I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but apparently they have a lot of confidence in this this mechanism that they have to count fish. As soon as that number drops, you're saying within 10 or 12 hours even, or a day, they can lower the regulation or change the regulation on how many people or can keep fish, or how many fish you can keep, or the limit is
Yep.
fluid right there, depending on the number of fish coming in. So first of all, what I'm interested in, what agency is making that determination, and then when the numbers of fish going down coming into the river, they can still trawl and do the same thing that they were doing 20 years ago, I guess. I don't know, but why is it that? I mean, we have this data of fish going into the river. Why is it that one agency, and I'm assuming that it's two agencies, one will immediately decline or lower the number of recreational fish allowed, or guided fish, or anything, but then the trawling stays exactly the same? What is there some reason why those are two different agencies, or is I don't really understand why it wouldn't go down as soon as there was any sort of data saying there weren't as many fish, that they would shut down the trawling too.
Yeah, so there's that's a great question. So there's the North Pacific Marine Fisheries Council, which is at the federal level. That council has members that are nominated by the governor of Alaska and some of the governors of the other North Pacific states, and those members vote on marine fisheries policy. So like all that policy with regard to the Gulf of Alaska, all these protected marine fishing, quote unquote protected marine fishing grounds. And then you have who regulates the sport fishermen, which is the Alaska Department of Fish and Game.
Okay.
That's a state level agency, wholly under the purview of the governor of Alaska. So yes, as far as fish counting, I've seen a lot of it myself. So they have aerial surveys of kings. They also have, or not just kings, but all fish in the river. They also use fish wheels along certain choke points in the river or other pinch points. They use weirs. They use a whole slew of different underwater cameras. Is a big one. And that's how they identify kind of how many fish, and they publish it. It's actually published on the Alaska Department of Fish and Game website for different river systems, how many fish are entering into the river system, and that's what dictates these emergency orders, which can very fluidly, I've seen it myself, change, catch limits from 3 to 6, back to 2, back to 3. It's kind of it's you almost need an attorney to go with you if you want to fish in Alaska anymore, because of it. And those guys are doing their best. So I spent 3 days running up the Yentna River, about 150 miles of river we did to do some bow fishing for an article I was writing about bow fishing for invasive pike, which also affect salmon to a degree, along the Deshka and Yentna River systems out in the Big Sioux drainage. And so we actually passed by a few of those fish wheels, and the biologist I was hanging out with kind of showed me how they work and stuff like that, how the fish surveys happen.
And so the Department of Alaska Fish and Game, they are very responsive to the number of fish and changing the laws and the rules. And I would be strongly in favor of that. I mean, if the data shows that there aren't as many fish, then as a responsible angler, of course, you don't keep as many. So why is it that the same thing is not happening with the trawling?
It's largely due to lobbying. They've got a lot of money. They've got a lot of power. They have strong, deep-pocketed kind of coalition interests, and the North Pacific Marine Fisheries Council is kind of very insulated from the opinions of your average fly fisherman, spin fisherman, whatever you are, like guide. So they're unaccountable. Those guys are unaccountable, and it doesn't affect them directly. So we're left with excuses after excuses, like saying that, well, we can't shut down the trawlers because they're not actually fishing for kings, they're fishing for pollock. So they don't take bycatch seriously, which is shocking to me, because the numbers are what they are, and these all came directly from their reports. And if you just look at the king salmon numbers that they're reporting bycatching, it's really concerning. That alone would be concerning to me. You start putting in how much halibut, and the fact that they're wasting, I reported 141 million pounds a year, and it's just unsustainable. Wow. I mean,
so in other fisheries, we've had situations where certain species were bycatch. Turtles, for example, in Florida, when you're shrimping, the turtles were getting caught in the net, and so they made them create fishing methods where they have these turtle-free nets where the turtles there's a way they can get out, and it's like a big hole in the net, and they can get out, and so that became the law. And I guess, there are places where you could look and say, okay, well, it worked here, something worked here, or the striped bass on the East Coast, which I'm sure you used to live in New Jersey. I'm sure you're very familiar with all of the different regulations and all of the very extremely complex laws and regulations and different agencies and different states and different countries even that are, you got Canada and United States, and you got a zillion different states up there on the eastern seaboard.
The Delaware River Compact, all that stuff.
Yeah, they all have different laws. They all have different biologists that have different data, and they're all making different laws and regulations about what they need to do about the striped bass, down to at some point it becomes a complete moratorium. Nobody can fish for them at all for any reason, and the striped bass has come back. If you were to wave a magic wand and say, do you think that you stop the trawling tomorrow and stop and even put a pause on recreational fishing. Do you think that the Kings could make a big comeback like that?
Absolutely.
You think so?
Oh yeah. I mean, think about all the challenges that even with all those complex laws and stuff that striped bass still have in the Northeast, right? They're still, I mean, the Delaware River, I grew up a quarter mile from the Delaware River, so I'm really familiar with this fishery, right? You have the bass finfish disease, which is actually rearing its head again down in the Maryland area.
Well, I don't really know about that. What does that do?
I'll have to send you some more information about it, but it rots their fins, basically, makes them immobile. It's a big killer of bass, though, and it jumps between bass species. So that's what actually has really massacred a lot of the smallmouth and largemouth bass fisheries in the river, and it also greatly affects the stripers. There's less shad than there were, 50 years ago. There's less just general forage of the smaller fish. The menhaden and stuff are all struggling because of just a number of reasons I won't go into on this podcast. But that all affects striped bass, and they're still making a comeback, right? And the Delaware is not anywhere near as clean or as well maintained as any river in Alaska. So if you were to give the King some room, especially from these giant factory boats, and allow them to recover, there's no doubt in my mind that they would make a startling recovery.
And how do you think, especially with your political background, that you understand how a lot of these things work, how would that happen? Is there a way that people can put pressure on that council or on the governor of Alaska, or I don't know, how would that happen? How does a citizen, a concerned citizen, make their voice known in this situation?
Yep. So I will send you a link to a Facebook group that we've started here in Alaska. That's a little over 20,000 members strong. That gives a lot of information on how to fight back against these trawler bans. It's called Stop Trawler Bycatch. So that is one way. Just get involved in that group. That you'll learn a lot about how to who to contact, how to contact them, etc. Otherwise, contacting Governor Dunleavy. He is so the North Pacific Marine Fisheries Council is again, it's that federal regulatory board which regulates the trawl fleet. There's 11 voting members of those, and the governor of Alaska is allowed to choose 6 of them, which is a majority. Okay, so contacting Governor Dunleavy, telling him to get anti-trawlers onto the board, stop giving those seats to pro-commercial fishermen, getting more of the small kind of recreational fishing interests on the board. That's a good start. Contacting the board directly, the North Pacific Marine Fisheries Council, that is a good opportunity. And you can also, if you're in Washington State, if you're in Oregon, and first of all, your king runs are being affected too. So you guys have historic king runs, which are nowhere near where they were 50 years ago. I used to live in Oregon. I know that from talking to fishermen that live there. So talking to your governors about getting pro-fishing regulators onto these federal regulatory boards, talking to your congressman, talking to your senator. And again, you gotta, the time to act is very quickly closing. So if people don't start taking this stuff seriously, if they let these international factory trawlers continue raping this Alaskan water, which, by the way, you're not allowed to factory trawl anywhere else in the United States. Nowhere else. Wow. You're not allowed to factory trawl off of California. You're not allowed to factory trawl off. That's why all the Washington boats come up here. They're not doing it out in their water. You're definitely not allowed to do it on the East Coast. So they're coming up here and using this outdated fishing method that's been banned in almost every country, almost everywhere else in our country. And they're destroying not just king fishing. They're destroying kings. They're destroying chum salmon. There's huge limits that were instituted this year on halibut. They're even allowed to fish the halibut nursery, which is exactly where halibut, like no one else is allowed to fish because that's where halibut are rearing their young.
What?
So, and they're dragging these giant factory trawling like vessels across the bottom there and just mowing these things down.
Wow.
So
it's amazing there's anything left. I mean, it really is. Like, I mean, there's certain fishing methods that are just too effective. I mean,
right.
They are just non-sustainable because they're too effective, and that's what fishermen do. It's like, okay, well, let's catch more, and then fishermen they're pretty smart. They figure it out. They're like, okay, well, we just need a bigger net, or we need a net that goes deeper, or we need a net that does this, or we need a helicopter or an airplane to spot the fish, and then we'll surround them with this big purse seine, and then we'll get them all. And over time, the method becomes better and better and better and better and better until it will catch them all. And eventually somebody has to step in and say, okay, well, you got to go back to hook and line fishing, or you got to go back to some other method that is not as effective. And in this situation, it seems pretty troubling that this is still allowed. And it also seems like a fairly big challenge to get the governor to change a couple of seats on that council. I mean, there's 6 people on that council for a reason, right? Because there's probably been some sort of influence or some sort of deal made, or I don't know what it is, but otherwise you would have a varied board that had a lot of different people being represented rather than the majority of the people being represented by commercial interests. So that seems like a challenge.
Yeah, it is. And, but we don't have another choice as sport anglers, right? If your dream is to come up to Alaska and you're saving up for 5 years out from now, you need to get involved, no matter if you're living in Mississippi or Missouri or, or Florida or anywhere else. Like if Alaska's on your bucket list to catch a potential 400-pound halibut, if you want to catch the next world record 100-pound king out of the Kenai, if you want to, even if you want to catch like chum salmon, just rip lips in like late August, early September, and you want to experience these legendary runs, which, by the way, again, as an East Coaster, I came out here and I can confirm that these fish are here and these fisheries are real. Then you need to get involved. And like there just isn't another choice, because if they're allowed to just continue to ad infinitum just continue to rape these waters, then it's going to be game over for fishing up here.
So you mentioned Washington, Oregon, Alaska. How do other people get involved?
Yeah, well, talking to your congressman, so Ted Stevens, for instance, in 2012 introduced a bill that didn't actually end up passing to ban factory trawlers, because that was the very first year that the second fall run of Kings was closed to sport fishing in Alaska. So you're talking about, again, that's an 11-year-old bill, right? Mm-hmm. You got to talk to your congressman. You got to get them to take it seriously, because you got to understand, if you're a congressman from Oklahoma, and you're not like a big fisherman yourself, you're worried about your own constituents. I can't fault those people for that, right? But like if once they learn that their constituents also care about this issue, once we get a large national swell of interest in it, and it's not just the climate folks, because again, going back to what I said very early on, all the news organizations at the national level in the lower 48, et cetera, are trying to blame all of this collapsing salmon fishery on climate change. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't hold water. There was a record run of Kenai River reds last year. There was, liberalizations and openings of, if my dog starts.
There's a bear in your backyard.
There might be a moose actually, but so the the reds are doing well. Even the silvers are doing a little bit better. Pinks are, running strong as they've ever done in a lot of fisheries. And those fish aren't on the same level of the water column that are affected like chums and kings are. So there's a direct correlation between all of these things if you link them together, and it's just not it's not just climate change. It can't be, because if it was, then the pinks would be struggling too, and so would the reds, and everything else that runs into this river systems.
It sure does seem like that's awfully convenient too to push the narrative of climate change for the people that are on that board, or for the commercial fishermen that own these trawlers, or that are the trawler fishermen, because that takes the blame off of them. Oh, well, it's not us. I mean, the climate's changing. It's all the, whatever the reason, the climate's changing. And that's, that seems very convenient. And it seems like that narrative would be fueled by the people that want to continue trawling. I mean, that seems like, maybe a conspiracy theory a little bit, but not really. Like that's their livelihood. And so if they can shift the blame off of them to somebody else, or to something that's not even someone, it's like something that is happening. That seems like that's definitely probably happening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like you said, incredibly convenient of them to be able to say things like that, but also it just totally redirects or deflects, in my opinion, blame from, and this is a deeper problem than just deflection, right? So I shouldn't blame it all on the trawlers and their PR groups and their public affairs firms and stuff, because I've spent my entire career working for these public affairs and public relations firms and stuff. I understand how all that stuff works, but this is it's also an issue because of the way that reporters report on these things, right? Like as somebody who communicates around hunting and fishing policy and has for 5 or 10 years now, I can tell you that there's a shocking amount of reporters who have no idea what the Pittman-Robertson Act is, for instance, or know what any of this policy means or what any of these boards are made up of. And like during the fluke fight, the 17 to 18 inch push in New Jersey, 5 years ago, trying to explain what the difference is there and the science and stuff behind it to reporters who's like, their title is environmental beat reporter, right? Trying to explain these concepts to them, which are fisheries policy is very complex. I will give them that. But I mean, they take the easy way out and they're like, you know what? We're going to get more clicks if we write about climate change than anything else. Nobody wants to read a 10,000 word expose on factory trawling. So it doesn't get written.
Yeah. Well, it's and it's no surprise when you explain it that way that you're saying that most of the newspapers in the lower 48 are reporting it one way, and then the Alaskan papers might be reporting it another way. There's two stories, and it's a more convenient story that is easier to digest, and that's what you get.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this: you shifting to something else. You said you're on the board of something. I missed it up there, but you're concerned about access, sportsman's access in Alaska.
Yeah, that's correct. It's the Alaska Outdoor Council. So it's the state affiliate of the NRA, but I've been on the board of similar organizations in other states. When I was in New Jersey, I was a member of the New Jersey Outdoor Alliance. I was their vice president. So we took on the governor about, fisheries and hunting policy there. In Alaska, the Alaska Outdoor Council, which fights for, fishing access, outdoor access to, trails and, non-motorized and motorized access to get out there and, and enjoy the great outdoors in Alaska.
And what do you think the status is of that in Alaska? Is the access good? Are you do you have big fights on your hands, or like where are you with that?
Little of both. We do have big fights on our hands. Like any state, you have the preservationists that are going to come in and try to restrict access whenever they can. And you get, big development interests that want to stop recreationalists from enjoying the great outdoors, which belongs to everyone. But Alaska really is the promised land, but that's just another reason to keep it that way, right? So like if we start letting this state, which is huge, I mean it's 33% of the size of the lower 48 to get combined, right?
Right.
So if you start letting huge swaths of Alaska get shut down, then you're endangering hunting and fishing at writ large. Okay, so a couple of our big fights right now, I mean, trawling is a big one at the moment. In addition to that, from a hunting and access standpoint, we're seeing issues with the Federal Subsistence Board. It's almost always federal boards, by the way, that are pushing these just crap policy on Alaskans and frankly, hunters and fishermen who come up to Alaska to enjoy the bounty that this state has to offer.
Right.
They're currently trying to shut down huge swaths of the state. I mean, as big as 6 or 7 other states.
Wow.
Entire units they're trying to shut down to non-local hunting and fishing. So they're trying to shut down like caribou and moose, for instance, to anybody who doesn't live in that specific area, which is wrong. I mean, there's one thing to shut down out-of-state hunting. There's one thing to limit everyone to a draw or something of that nature and like give out a certain amount of tags. It's almost inexcusable, in my opinion, to just say, okay, only the people in this area can hunt this area. Like that's ridiculous.
Why would they want to do that? Are they just trying to restrict access for some reason, or is it?
I mean, there's a lot of murky science around that, and we could go into a whole nother. Podcast about that, which I don't think my dog will let me do. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. We're closing in on time as the moose comes into your backyard, which I'm sure that's probably what's going on. That's
actually exactly what it is. He's over in the trees there. I can see him.
Wow, that's awesome. Bull or a cow or what?
Nah, it's just a cow. I think she hangs out around this area a lot though, because I've seen her a couple times.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You got a moose in your backyard. That's amazing. I love moose. My kids were just in Yellowstone National Park the other day, and they saw 2. So they were.
Oh my God,
they're my favorite animals to see.
I used to think they were very, very just what do you call it, graceful. Mm-hmm. And then one time I was walking my dog. And a real young calf was kind of running alongside of us, just trying to keep pace with us. He was like in the trees, and he went ass over tea kettle, just fell right on his face and flipped over. And I was on my knees laughing about it. And I was like, you know what? Maybe they're not as graceful as I thought they were.
Yeah.
But they can be a little ornery. So Stormy is an Alaskan Husky. He was bred out in the bush in a I rescued him from a native village, and I have had to teach him to respect wildlife a little better. So when he's inside, he barks at him. When he's outside, he tends to leave him alone because he's learned. But the first night I got him, they dropped him off at the end of my driveway, and a moose charged us. And that was his first night in civilization.
Wow.
So he'd never been inside a building before. He got dropped off outside of my house. And as soon as he got out of a car, a big cow moose came from across the street in this big, I mean, it's all woods and where I live. Big cow moose came from across the street, the woods across the street, and just like charged us. And I had to shove him back into the car and hop over the car to the other side of it and wait for her to walk away. And then I opened that side of it and took him inside.
Wow. So, Alaska's a crazy place, man. It's a crazy place.
And I'm not really way out in the bush either.
Yeah.
No,
I don't think you have to be, man. From what I saw
don't.
up there, you could see it right in the middle of town. But Alaska is a really incredible, beautiful, vast state. And, I really hope that we can get this salmon, especially the king salmon, back under control and certainly have it for our grandchildren and beyond. So if you could one more time, just tell people how they could maybe make the biggest impact. Certainly talk to your congressman, but there were the Facebook assets and other things. And if there's anything else that they can do, that would be very, very helpful information.
So let me pull that Facebook page for you. So talk to your governor, or talk to the governor, Governor Dunleavy. Talk to your congressman, your senator, and then you can join our Facebook group at Stop Alaskan Trawler Bycatch. That again is Stop Alaskan Trawler Bycatch. We're 25,000 members strong. If you help us make it to 50, that'll be one more drop in the bucket as we try to make an actual impact on trawling's effect here in Alaska. And then just get the word out, your friends and family. Try to be mindful about buying food from Trident Seafood, Pacific Seafoods, these big factory trawler organizations. If we stop making a market for this stuff, there'll be less of an incentive to do it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, I hope that we make some real progress here, and I appreciate you coming on and giving us all the information. So that's the marching orders for everybody is pay attention to this issue and do what you can. So
absolutely, thanks,
back
Tom.
Up there, yeah, man. Thanks, Cody. I appreciate it, and hope your dog has a good time with that moose.
I'm sure he will.
All right, man. All right, thanks so much, and we'll check in with you again and see how we're doing on this issue in the future.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.